Before we get into today's show, let me tell you about HubSpot. If you're hustling in the trenches to build a business or bootstrapping one of your own, let's talk about an AI-powered tool that can lighten up your workload a bit. HubSpot's Campaign Assistant is a game changer for creating marketing campaigns at scale. It quickly turns your key selling points into a cohesive pitch, which helps you deliver knockout emails, ads, and landing pages in minutes. So let Campaign Assistant take care of the campaigns so you can get back to growing your business. Work smarter, not harder at HubSpot.com/campaign-assistant.
Morning, everyone. It's Friday, April 14th. I'm Zachary Crockett here with Mark Dent, and you are listening to the Hustle Daily Show. So a few weeks ago, Mark and I ran a survey in our newsletter asking our readers all kinds of questions about the economics of dating. How much people spend on dates, where they go, how inflation has affected them. And today, we're going to talk through some of those results. And if you want to see the full report on this, you can check out our email this Sunday. We've got a full breakdown of all the results there. But first, let's talk about what else is going on in business and tech. The cost of a first-class USPS postage stamp will increase from 63 cents to 66 cents in July. That may sound pretty small, but the USPS is on a decade-long mission to wipe out a $160 billion shortfall, and it hopes to break even this year. A 3-cent increase on stamps is a little way to chip away at that. The Library of Congress's National Recording Registry has 25 new inductees, including Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You, the Super Mario Brothers theme song, and Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. Luxury brand LVMH reportedly broke into the world's top 10 companies as it reached a market cap of $486 billion on Thursday. If it hits $500 billion, it's going to become the first European company in history to ever do that. The EPA predicts that Americans would save up to $1.1 trillion on gas if its new auto emission standards were to be adopted. EVs would cost more upfront, but the EPA maintains that owners would save on fuel and maintenance in the long run. This year's women's college basketball tournament scored record TV ratings, and it also set high marks in gambling. BetMGM said that betting on the women's tournament increased 30% year over year, with action actually comparable to an average NFL game. And lastly, an uplifting update. Colorado farmers have won the right to repair their own equipment. This has, of course, been an ongoing battle between farmers and tractor giant John Deere, and the farmers appear to have won out on that one. So one of the reasons we decided to explore the economics of dating right now is that obviously we've been dealing with rampant inflation over the past year, and it seems like daters have been hit especially hard. The cost of food has gone up, the cost of drinks has gone up, the cost of gas and transportation has gone up. It doesn't seem like it's an easy time to be on the dating scene right now as a single person.
No, it's like literally every component is like what we are thinking of when we think of inflation is certainly impacted when it comes to dating. Like if people get brunch and do eggs, I feel like that's the only way that it could be any more impacted.
Yeah.
But so I think we wanted to do this survey to just kind of flesh out like what it means to sort of date in the year 2023 in this kind of unusual economic period, you know? Yeah. And it's interesting because I think people 2-3 years ago when the pandemic began, for instance, people were dating in different ways. They were going on walks, you know, they'd have long, maybe Zooms before they'd meet with somebody, maybe even a couple of Zooms before they would actually meet in person. And I think people often saved a lot of money in those days. And now we're kind of back out to something that resembles more of the 2017, if you will, dating life, except for the fact that it is without question more expensive. And I think that our survey results are pretty fascinating around finances.
Yeah. You mentioned a lot of people at the height of the pandemic were trying to find workaround dates, maybe going on walks and hikes. One of the questions we asked was actually, you know, what is your go-to first date? And we should say here, before we get into the results, we got about 700 responses. Our audience does skew a little bit younger than the typical national average of 38 years old. It also skews slightly male and slightly higher earning than the average American demographic. But we asked this question, what is your go-to first date? And I was kind of surprised how few people actually go on like active dates or just go to movies. It wasn't that many. And like overwhelmingly by far, people just go to get drinks at a bar.
Yeah. I mean, that was, I believe, around 49% of respondents said that. 27% said dinner, which is basically like the cousin of, of drinks at a bar. It's like slightly longer and slightly more formal. And then it was 21% said something active, 2% hang out at home. I'm interested in who those 2% are.
Yeah.
And then 1% for a movie, which was extremely low. Yeah. And to add a little kind of perspective to the something active equation that I also thought would be a bit higher, I did speak to someone from Colorado who she really likes to do active things when she goes out on dates. And there's a couple of hurdles to it, though, she told me, which is that for one thing, like active dates can tend to be a little bit more expensive. She was also like, you know what? The men, they don't like to organize. And she's organizing everything. And so it gets hard to do activities when it's, incumbent on her to do it all the time.
Interesting. Well, speaking of gender norms, another thing I found interesting here is a question in our survey was, do you typically pay for a date? And if you look at it across gender lines, there is sort of this trope that men should pay for dates. A lot of people think it's outdated. But among our respondents, the responses were very traditional.
Yeah.
Over 80% of male respondents said that they always paid for the date. And I think only something like 5% of women said that they always paid for the date. Although splitting the bill seemed to be a little more robust, at least. When it comes to sharing the bill, things just are still very traditional.
Yeah, right. And I wonder, of that 83%, that might be one of those survey questions where the actual number could be a little bit lower in real life, but people like to say that they always pay for it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's move on to the cost of the date here, because that was kind of the meat of our survey. We found across, our 700 responses that the average spend on a date is somewhere around $68. $68 hopefully is enough to cover a few drinks at a bar these days. I don't know. But again, that figure, if you break it across demographics, the average man who pays for a date said he spent $87 on a date. That's nearly 30% higher, while the average woman said she spent about $48 when she did pay for a date. Also, across age lines, Gen Z and millennials spent less than the average. Average Gen Z respondent only spent about $49 on a date. Gen Xers spent the most, $82 per date. And then, of course, across income, lower earners, as expected, spent significantly less than higher earners on dates. So there does seem to be sort of a correlation between how much you earn and how much you spend on dates. But when we looked at inflation and the impact of inflation, people acknowledged that dates have gotten considerably more expensive, but they weren't really willing to reel back on their dating habits, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think like the exact numbers from the survey showed that the vast majority, 85%, have noticed that dating has gotten more expensive, but only around 38% said it has caused them to go on fewer dates. But that's still a pretty big chunk when you think about it. And it may not be, when you match it up to that 85, it's not a lot, but that means more than a third of people have decided to kind of change their dating habits because of inflation. And to bring up that conversation again I had with this woman from Colorado who kind of gave me a little bit deeper look at some of the decisions she's made because of finances in dating. She has gone on fewer dates, she believes, because of it.
Oh, wow.
When she tried to explain that to me, she was like, I know it sounds really weird that I'm doing it, but she just feels like she is. And it's changing the types of dates she goes on. As mentioned before, those activity dates can be more expensive. She even laid out the scenario where hey, if you go for a walk, that's free. But if the date is going well, typically you're going to go get a drink after that, or maybe dinner after that. And so that's kind of something that she thinks about. And those thoughts, she's evaluating, really making these kind of decisions about okay, how do I want to spend my social time? I can go to dinner with my friends, which will be expensive, but I know it'll be fun. Or I can go on a date and it'll be potentially expensive and who knows what's going to happen. And so those are calculations that people are making.
I do feel like there is sort of a stigma about trying to find cheaper alternatives for dates, though. I imagine some people out in the dating scene take umbrage if you suggest going on a date that does not cost money. It's like, what? I'm not worth spending money on? And one data point to sort of back up this thesis is that we asked, has a person's income ever dictated whether or not you go on a date with them? And about half of respondents said that it has. So people, clearly think about finances and money and economics as it relates to dating, both before and during their dates.
Yeah. And I mean, it depends obviously on the dating app, which is how a lot of people, of course, find dates. But the person's profession is usually front and center, or certainly at least somewhere pretty visible on the profile. So it's very easy to tell, if not exactly what somebody's income is, before you know like almost anything else about them, right? Like you're probably going to know like at least salary range or something that would hint at what their earnings are. So I think that was, I don't know, I guess in some ways, well, especially given I know our audience skews a little bit more people who do care about finances and stuff. So I guess it's not too surprising, but nevertheless, like that's real.
Yeah. Do you remember, what was your first date with your wife?
We had like an odd sort of courtship because we met when I was like 18 years old or whatever.
Yeah.
And we didn't date. We lived in different cities or whatever. So we didn't really go on a first date, I would say, until, many years later. And we just went to a restaurant that was like near my house. I was living in Dallas at the time, which is where I live now. And I paid for the check, I paid for the whole thing.
Oh, what a gentleman.
Yeah, it was a nice restaurant. So yeah. But I'll add this too. When people are talking about these activities and like the free dates and having there be some stigma, I'll say this, the worst date that I've ever been on was a walking date.
Really?
And yes, and it was not because of the walk. Well, actually, yeah, it kind of was because of the walk. So we just weren't a good match. It wasn't necessarily me or her. We just weren't the right fit. Okay. And we went walking. And the problem was we went on this trail. I was living in Philadelphia and it was a there and back route, not a circular one. And so we got, basically to the halfway point, and it was pretty clear that we weren't a good match. And it was just like, oh no, like now we got to turn around and do
you got to take the walk of shame back.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's tough. Yeah, man, you got to do the loops. That way you have a bailout point. What
was the first date for you and your wife, who I know you guys also met a long time ago?
Well, we're both kind of weird, Marcus. I feel like I also met my now wife when I was 17, and she was actually my math tutor. But I remember, just being this like poor kid. I had no money. The only money I had was sort of from working our odd jobs, painting people's decks and stuff during the summer. And I borrowed my dad's car. I drove into San Francisco, and the first thing I did was accidentally drive down a one-way street and almost kill us both. And I think we just got something to eat somewhere and, walked around a bit in the city. But your classic like teenage date, I guess.
Yeah.
The other weird thing is, I guess you and I have never really experienced what it's like to be on the dating scene with dating apps.
I did actually for a few years. I was, for a year or two, I was on it. Yeah.
Not a fan?
I was, it's one of those things where, you kind of have to go on and off of them. Like you can go on quite a few dates and just realize like, okay, none of these were all that great, and then you just shut them off. And so I feel like that's probably what a lot of people end up doing on them. And, just some of the survey responses we saw is that like the apps in some ways devalue like the dating experience to where like you don't really want to go on that special or potentially expensive of a first date or a second date because it feels like there are so many out there and you're not sure if the other person is going to take it all that seriously because that they have such a wide variety of things out there. And there was a lot of people who said that in our survey.
The last thing I'll say on that note is I did sort of in the process of going through the survey, came across some research by this researcher who suggested that if your goal is to find an ideal partner, there is something called the optimal stopping theory. It's basically like the optimal stopping theory is used when you want to determine when to take a certain action that will maximize the payoff and minimize your future costs. And this applies to many things, not just dating. But in the context of dating, this researcher found that you want to reject the first 37% of potential matches to maximize your chances of finding the most ideal partner.
Wow.
I guess after that point, I guess it's like a low-hanging fruit type of theory where like the first opportunities that come in won't usually be the best. And then there's sort of a breaking point at 37% where you start getting into the territory of ideal matches. I don't know if that holds any water, but that is one theory that's out there on dating.
That is super exact.
If anyone's curious. Yeah, very exact. And I should say this guy was a particle physicist and a mathematician. And I'd be very curious to hear about his own personal success with this theory.
Right. Yeah. Personal narrative essay. That's what we want.
Yeah. dating is not mathematical or scientific, as anyone who dates a lot probably knows. But anyway, if you want to find more on this survey, we've got a full breakdown of the results coming out this Sunday. This was the tip of the iceberg. Go and check it out at thehustle.co/stories if you're interested. And that's going to do it for us today. Thanks for tuning into the Hustle Daily Show. We're a proud part of the HubSpot podcast network. Our editor today was Robert Hartwig, and our executive producer was Darren Clarke. We will catch you all next week.
Hey guys, if you listen to the Hustle Daily Show on Google Podcasts, we want to let you know that the option will no longer be available pretty soon. Google is sunsetting its podcast app sometime in early 2024 in favor of YouTube Music, and we want to give you a heads up before it's too late, since that time's almost here. The Hustle Daily Show is available everywhere and anywhere that you listen to podcasts, like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're using YouTube Music, we are there as well. If you're an Android fan, there are plenty of apps like Overcast, Pocket Casts, Player FM, and more. So just search for us wherever you decide to listen to your favorite podcasts.